Hello everyone, and welcome to my tutorial on how to make a painter's tape seam guide for a 1/4 inch seam for quilters. As quilters, we are dependent upon having a very accurate 1/4 inch seam allowance. All of our templates, all of our mathematical formulas, and everything that we have assume that we have a perfect 1/4 inch seam allowance. The straighter and truer and more accurate that 1/4 inch seam allowance is, the easier our pieces go together, and the flatter our projects look, and the crisper and cleaner they are, and things just it just makes the world of quilting so much more enjoyable. There are several different methods for getting a 1/4 inch seam allowance. A lot of people have actual special 1/4 inch sewing feet, or something such as this here. Which is a magnetic seam guide. The problem that I have with these particular devices is that, one, they may not be perfectly accurate. I have read several Facebook posts and things where people have talked about their 1/4 inch foot is not necessarily a 1/4 inch foot. The other thing with this one here is that it is a magnetic, and the way that you adjust it is by sliding it on the bed of your sewing machine. Well, if it slides so that you can adjust it, that means that it can slide while you're using it, and therefore, you can very quickly go ahead and knock it out of balance, or out of alignment there. The other problem is that usually you have this right about here is where your needle is going to be, so you're not getting your pieces accurately positioned until very shortly before the needle. And generally speaking, by that time, it's almost too late to fix an issue. It's kind of like driving a car in which you're looking right at the very front of the hood of your car, and you end up doing one of these here to try to stay between the lines, when you're driving. You want to be able to look far ahead to go ahead and make very subtle adjustments as you need to, and get a truer, straighter, more accurate, and consistent seam allowance. The other problem is for those that have these type of devices, or your 1/4 inch foot. Well, the 1/4 inch foot really doesn't matter too much, but with these devices here, or some people have used really thick moleskin, or even stacks of sticky pad paper, is that if you need to go ahead and quickly do another type of sewing project, oftentimes you're required to move these out of your way, such as if, I don't know about anybody else, but I have several projects that I work on all at the same time. I have projects that need to have the binding put on. I have projects that are template pieced, so I need that 1/4 inch seam allowance. I have others that are paper pieced, and depending on which type of project you're working on will determine as to what setup you need. What's nice about having a tape seam guide here is that it is thick enough that you can go ahead and actually push your fabric up against the edge and feel it, so you know that you're getting a nice accurate seam, but it's thin enough that if you need to go ahead and switch to paper piecing, or if you need to go ahead and quickly sew a patch on a pair of jeans or something to that effect, you don't have to remove this in order to do your different projects. Let's go ahead and I'll show you the tools that we'll need. These are all very basic, inexpensive tools, and if you've been quilting for any length of time, or even getting into quilting, you should already have these tools on hand. First and foremost, you're going to need to have a cutting surface. In this case here, I have a cutting mat. I also use just my standard rotary cutting templates. This one here just happens to be a 9.5 inch square. I also have a rotary cutter. This one here, you do not want to use your brand new really good blades. Use your slightly dull but not quite ready to be tossed in the trash blades. Usually I start out with a brand new blade. I cut on fabric, and when that becomes a little bit too dull there, then I go ahead and I downgrade it, and this is what I use for cutting paper, for paper piecing templates, and for things such as this where I'm going to be cutting tape. The other thing that we're going to need is some kind of way to mark our seam allowance. These ones here, I'll start out with this. This is actually something that I bought at the big box fabric stores. It's made by Dritz. It's called a quilter's gauge. And basically all it is a short ruler that's about 1/4 inch thick, that has a series of holes here at different measurements. And so the way that we're going to align our tape measure, or our tape seam guide, so that we know that we have an accurate 1/4 inch seam, is basically we're going to sink our sewing machine needle through the hole here and then line up our tape guide along this edge here. If you can't find one of these, or if you don't already have one, an alternative that you can use is just to go ahead and get some kind of cardstock. In this case, it's just one of my business cards here. Junk mail is great for this here, but all you're going to do is just mark a 1/4 inch line, and then we're going to take our unthreaded sewing machine needle and sink it right on that line here. I know it's really hard to see on the camera here, but there is a hole where this line meets here at a 1/4 inch. Okay. The most important, another piece of equipment that we're going to need is some kind of a precision cutting tool. This one here is just a box cutter or an X-Acto knife. And what I use this for is that once I go ahead and I lay my tape in there, I want to be able to go ahead and cut around my bobbin case lid so that I don't have to remove my tape every time I want to go ahead and change my bobbin. Last but not least is a roll of just regular blue painter's tape. I prefer the blue painter's tape because it is low tack. Okay, as I was saying, I like to go ahead and use blue painter's tape. It is something that is sticky enough that it will stay in place, but it can be easily removed and it does not leave a sticky residue. You do not want to use regular masking tape. If it gets any kind of heat on it, if it's been there for more than, I would say, even a couple of days, it tends to really leave a sticky residue, and I would hesitate to use any kind of solvents or anything around your sewing machine to try to go ahead and clean that up. There's blue, this is the blue painter's tape, and then there's also the purple painter's tape. I find that the purple painter's tape is, it's designed so that you can put it on like freshly painted walls, and when you peel it off, it has such a low tack on it, it's not going to peel off the fresh paint. Keep that in mind, that when you're also doing this on the sewing machine as well, it's not as sticky as the blue stuff, so therefore it's not going to last nearly as long. What I like about the painter's tape here is that you can go ahead and get one roll, and you can get, you know, hundreds of tape guides on here, because it is tape. It does go ahead and wear out after a while. You may need to remove it to go ahead and take your machine apart to go ahead and do a real thorough cleaning on here. It's pretty inexpensive. You can get a whole roll of tape for just a couple of dollars. And like I said, you can go ahead and get hundreds of different tape guides on there. Okay. Now that we've got that, I'm going to go ahead and move these items out of the way of the camera so that we can actually see what we're going to do. And what I'm going to start out with is I'm just going to take one piece, probably a little longer than 6 inches, and I'm just going to lay it on my cutting mat here. And for ease of lining these up, I'm just going to use one guideline on my cutting mat. And I'm going to put a total of 5 layers on here. And don't stress real hard or a whole lot about trying to get these edges lined up perfectly, because no matter how perfect you are, it's not going to be perfect, and we're not actually going to use this edge. So there's 3. There's 4. And here's 5 layers of tape. Okay? And what you want to do is you want to take a moment to go ahead and really rub those pieces together. I warn you, it does make your fingers really nice and warm. That's why I'm switching from one hand to the other. And the reason why you want to do this is so that when you go to peel this up here, that you want to peel all 5 layers together. You don't want them to become separated. Okay, now that I've got these on here, I'm just going to go ahead and really quickly just cut off the edges, just to make them nice and even and pretty. And see, this is why you don't want to go ahead and you want to push those layers together so that when you peel it off, you don't have that problem there. Okay, and then I'm going to go ahead and cut this off here. Now you can customize the length for whatever sewing machine setup that you have. Mine is actually, my sewing machine is actually sunk into the table that my husband was kind enough to build for me. If you have one of those acrylic extension tables, you can go ahead and make it as long as you need to get to the edge of that. Basically, you need to go ahead and measure just from right before your feed dogs in front of the needle to the edge of your table. If you don't have a table or you don't have an extension bed, just as long as it's as wide as the throat space for your particular machine. Now that I have this cut here, I've got my 5 layers of tape, and I've got everything all pushed well together. As I was saying, no matter how hard we try, these layers here are not going to be like a factory edge. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go ahead and cut this. It doesn't have to be exactly in the middle, just somewhere in the middle, so you actually end up getting 2 tape guides for the price of 1. So that's great if you have more than one machine that you sew on, as some people do, or if you have a sewing friend that you want to go ahead and get 2 for the price of 1. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to cut right down the middle of it, and because that way I end up creating a factory cut edge. At this point in time, what I'm going to do is I'm going to very carefully, because I don't have my edges are not perfectly stuck together, and that's okay. Just make sure that that is not the part that is right in front of the needle. I'm just going to go ahead and lift these up here. Wow, I did this the first time and didn't have any issues with it. Okay, and at this point in time, basically I've already got these all set up and ready to go. This cut edge, what we're going to do is we're going to sink our needle into our 1/4 inch hole that we have here, and I'm going to make sure that this cut edge is lined up with this edge here on our sewing machine. So what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to leave this the way that it is at the moment. I'm going to reset up my camera and everything, and I'm going to go ahead and show you how to set this up at your actual sewing machine. So I'll see you back here in just a moment. Okay, welcome back on our tutorial here on how to go ahead and do a painter's tape 1/4 inch seam guide for quilters. I've rearranged my camera and everything, and my son is in the room, so hopefully he won't disturb us too much. But I do want to say this, I have a newfound appreciation for cameramen, because this is not an easy thing to set up. Okay, right now I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to use my seam guide that I have here, or like I said, if you don't have one of these here, just use a regular business card that has a 1/4 inch seam line written on here, and then punch a hole with your needle right through on that line. So what I'm going to do here, hopefully with my bad eyes, is I'm going to attempt to find a hole. Give me a moment here. Maybe if I had turned the lights on, I'd be able to see it. And actually, what I'm going to do real quickly is I'm going to take my foot off. And I'm going to sink my needle down. Okay? Now normally you probably want to go ahead and spend the time to actually put your foot on there, because then what you can do is actually lower your presser foot and will hold this this guide in place. And what I'm using is I'm just going to eyeball it to be perfectly straight with the way that my feed dogs are. You don't want to tilt it to the side or this way or that way, but you want to make sure that your needle is centered on your machine. Mine has an adjustable way to go ahead and move the needle from side to side. So you want to make sure that that's centered. You're going to sink it through the hole in there, and then we're going to take our prepared tape guide that we made, and again this was the cut edge, and I'm going to put that right along the edge of my seam guide, and I'm going to make sure that I'm not covering up my feed dogs. And as I do that, I'm just going to go ahead, and it goes right off the edge of my table here. And go ahead and get that nice and firmly secured in there. Okay? Sorry for bumping the camera. Once you have that, you want to make sure that you carefully go ahead and remove your tape guide. And I'm just going to quickly put this on here, because like I said, I have a 3-year-old or a 4-year-old that's running around, and I don't want him to run off with my toys. Okay? So now, as you can see with my particular machine here, my machine is set into the tabletop. This is something that my handy husband went and made for me. I also have a drop-in bobbin case here. At this point in time, if I had to change the bobbin, and actually I'm looking at my bobbin case here and it looks like it's about ready to run out, I don't want to have to remove this tape every time to go ahead and change out my bobbin. So what I'm going to do at this time is I'm going to take my box cutter or your X-Acto knife, and I'm going to very carefully, let me stress that again, very carefully and slowly cut around the edge of my bobbin case cover. Now I can actually tell that I've done this several times because I have a score line right here. And maybe if I had put a sharper blade in here, this would go a little bit quicker. Basically what I'm going to do is I want to cut all around here. If I can find the edge, I can get it sunk in there. That's probably the hardest part. Apologize, I'm not any faster at this than that. There we go. Now that I found the edge. Okay. And I'm just going to go ahead and remove that. So that's my little tape edge there. Now these lines here are still aligned, so I have all this room up here to go ahead and line up my pieces. I can still have access by pressing this little tab here, and as you can see, my bobbin case cover comes off and the tape is still attached. I can go ahead and easily change out my bobbin, and then when I go ahead and I put my lid back on, I still have my tape guide. For those of you that don't really have anything that's longer, or like I said, a set-in table, this may be long enough for you, just how wide that is. So if this ends up having to get replaced or removed, like I said, down here, sometimes this comes up, and that's why I have things taped all over the place. I customize my machine as much as I need to. I strongly encourage you to do the same. Again, all we're going to do now is when you go ahead and you line up your pieces, especially if you're doing like really long strip piecing, if you're making bindings, if you are doing jelly roll races or making borders or things of that nature, it's really nice because you can go ahead and line up all the way down to here, line it up and just follow it with your fingers. You can almost go ahead and stitch a perfect 1/4 inch seam allowance, and you don't even have to be watching what you're doing. I've had that happen every once in a while where, you know, somebody comes in the room and they grab my attention, and before I have a chance to actually stop sewing for a moment, I can stitch a few stitches without having to actually look at what I'm doing. Anyways, I hope that this has been informative. I encourage you to go ahead and give this a try. It does not take a lot of tools. It doesn't take a lot of money. It's something that's easily replaceable. Like I said, happy quilting. Thank you very much for watching. Bye-bye.